This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
4 key names to watch emerge during fall camp for the Wolverines. Next on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
There's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
They said you can't beat Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue! I'm Steve Deace, and welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Fall camp is in full swing. The pads are now on in Ann Arbor. And as we look ahead to the next few weeks, some names we may or may not hear emerge. I mean, fall camp reports are always a ton of fun. For example, one of the major Michigan websites online today reported that Alex Orji is clearly the best quarterback so far in fall camp. And another one of the major Michigan websites reported that Davis Warren was. So fall camp reports are great. All right. And a lot of this stuff that we're going to, conjecture about and speculate about will not actually be confirmed until we see games. But here are 4 names that I think are key for emerging for Michigan this year, either in terms of starting positions or to provide key depth. 2 on offense, 2 on defense. Let's do this in alphabetical order. Starting on defense with cornerback Jair Hill, a prize recruit from a couple of years ago, consensus 4-star prospect, kind of the next in line to be the alpha corner at Michigan. In terms of athletics, he is a superior prospect to what Josh Wallace was playing as the complement to Will Johnson a year ago. But Josh Wallace was also a very good complimentary corner a year ago. So those are big shoes for Jair Hill to fill. And given the fact, I think, Wink Martindale's not Don Brown, but he's also not Jesse Minter either. The truth is somewhere in the middle. We're going to play more man defense this year. And I think that's going to put more of an impetus on having a true athletically gifted corner opposite Will Johnson on the other side. I think they're hoping that guy is Jair Hill, and based on his recruiting profile, so are we. So that's one name to watch here during fall camp. Here's another. Evan Link might be the best offensive line prospect that Michigan has signed in the last few classes. Another consensus 4-star pure tackle. That's why he was given there the number 77. And word early on in fall camp is that he has really shined through and is challenging now both Andrew Gentry and Jeff Percy for that starting position there at right tackle. At the very least, having him be that key swing tackle, that 6th or 7th guy at Michigan under Sharon Moore, I'm pretty confident we're going to piece together somewhere between capable to excellent offensive lines there in the front 5. It's the depth you're concerned about. last year, our second offensive line unit would have been a first division offensive line in the Big Ten. This year, it's not so much about finding the starting five. There's still going to be a lot of starts up there between guys like Giovanni El-Hadi, Josh Preeb, for example, Miles Hinton. It's really about who's 6, 7, and 8. Where does that depth come from? You're going to get injuries up there. And so trying to figure out that depth, that's where Evan Link could be a key. As maybe he is one of those depth pieces now before he steps forward as a cornerstone in 2025. Third on the list, Jordan Marshall, Mr. Football in the state of Ohio, the highest rated overall recruit that Michigan has signed in the last 3 classes, wearing the number 24 there of Zach Charbonnet and Butch Woolfolk, drawing a lot of comparisons to Blake Corum, and that's from people inside the program. And remember, when Blake Corum was a true freshman, that opening night of the COVID season in Minneapolis there on the road, he got the very first carry of that game, not Zach Charbonnet or Hassan Haskins. So this is a pretty crowded backfield already. You're talking about Donovan Edwards, who has some of the most memorable touchdown runs in school history. A lot is being expected of Kalel Mullings, kind of the thunder to Donovan's lightning, if you will. And Sharon has really talked up Kalel Mullings as well. But who's the third back? Is it Benjamin Hall, who flashed 2 springs ago? Is it Cole Cabana, a former 4-star prospect out of the state of Michigan? Or is it this young man, Mr. Football in Ohio, Jordan Marshall? That's a name to keep an eye on in camp as well. And then the final name to watch is linebacker Cole Sullivan. This is a classic Jim Harbaugh era recruit in that he touches all of the boxes athletically, but because the scouting services are not necessarily sure what position is he, how do you project him? And so he gets underrated as a recruit. Jimmy brought in a bevy of these guys at Stanford and turned a lot of them into pros. He's done the same thing at Michigan as well. And I think Cole Sullivan is going to be the next out of that batch. He really shined in the spring. A lot of the current players have been talking him up on a lot of the podcasts I listen to. Michigan has shown the last few years, Junior Colson, Jimmy Rolder, they'll mix a freshman recruit in there to get him ready to take on a bigger role a little bit later on. The top 2 with Jayshawn Barham and Ernest Hausman, that's as good of a 1-2 punch at linebacker as there is in the Big Ten, maybe in America. And we play a lot of nickel defense, as most college defenses do these days. So you're not going to see much of the traditional 4-3 look anymore. But there are moments we've got multiple linebackers on the field. There are moments in sub packages where you sub guys out. Jimmy Rolder had injuries last year, had kind of a disappointing second year. There's minutes there for Cole Sullivan, and man, he was something else in the spring. And in terms of his body type, he does not look like a young player. So those are 4 players that I think are key to emerging during fall camp, and the kinds of players that their emergence, they either become critical starters for you later in the year or key depth pieces, especially when you're talking about if you want to win the national championship now, you're playing an NFL season between the extended playoff and the 12-game regular season. So depth is more of a key than ever before. 4 names to watch during fall camp. When we come back, we'll find out what our good friend Mark Rogers thinks about this and what he's looking at from a Buckeye perspective as he is following Michigan's fall camp as well. We'll get to that here in a moment. All right, it's time again for the 10-minute war. For those of you that are new to the show, that's kind of our homage to the 10-year war, the maybe the most celebrated period of this most celebrated of rivalries between Michigan and Ohio State, with Woody Hayes and Bo Schembechler, the student and the teacher, the father figure and the surrogate son, the head coach and his former assistant going back and forth in this great rivalry for a decade. And these are maybe the headiest days in this rivalry since then. And Mark Rogers is our good friend. He, of course, is one of the few reasonable Bucknuts, but he also has a fantastic channel right here on YouTube as well, the voice of college football that I know is covering all of the camp battles around the country. So I want to get to Mark's take on what he's looking for in covering inside Michigan camp. I talked about 4 players that I'm interested in seeing emerge during fall camp because I think they'll be pivotal either in terms of being spot starters or guys that can be set up this year to become cornerstone players next year. But Mark, before we get there, I don't know if you saw the video from the Pro Football Hall of Fame that came out over the weekend, a name you would know because you and I were little kids, but we grew up at least hearing names in this rivalry like Randy Gradishar. And he just got admitted into Canton, Ohio, at the Pro Football Hall of Fame by the Veterans Committee. And Archie Griffin, still the only 2-time Heisman Trophy winner, was sitting right there in the front row. And I don't know if you heard Randy Gradishar's acceptance speech, but it was phenomenal. And he thanked Archie Griffin for taking him to a Campus Crusade for Christ meeting when he was a student athlete at Ohio State. And for those of you that don't know, that's an old school name, but Randy Gradishar was a very bad man. That was a very bad man. Okay, and I don't mean that like put him in prison. More like he'll put you in the hospital. He was a very bad man. Now he's pushing 80. Okay, and the shoulders aren't quite as broad, and the bench press isn't quite as hefty. But you could still see what made him a very bad man on the football field, because he stood up there on that perch in front of all those people on that massive stage, brother, and gave out the gospel and thanked Archie Griffin for the role he played in changing his life. And, you're sitting there wearing the scarlet shirt. I'm sitting there. I'm actually wearing the Michigan logo from the era in which Randy Gradishar played. This was our logo back in those days. Okay. But I think this is on one thing anyway that we can come together and agree. That was a very well done, good and faithful servant moment there by a couple of Buckeyes.
Well, that is certainly something I'm going to have to go back and watch and listen to and take in those words. Yeah, Randy Gradishar just predated my fandom of Ohio State football, but big number 53, yes, one of the all-time greats. And you bring up Archie Griffin and bring up our faith, Steve, you and I as born-again Christians. And Archie is a guy that I spoke to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes when I was the sports director at WCBI in Columbus, Mississippi, CBS station down there. And Archie Griffin was our guest speaker. And he did not know me from anyone else. And I requested that Archie Griffin come down to the station, and I put everything to the side, meaning I, for one day, did not do my job. And I said, you know what? Whatever these folks in Mississippi want to see concerning sports today on this summer afternoon, I couldn't have gotten away with it, of course, during basketball or football season. But Archie Griffin's going to sit with me for 5 or 6 minutes in the newsroom, and we're just going to talk football and talk about his career. And that's going to be our sportscast. And I was allowed to do that. And Archie Griffin was nice enough, not knowing me, to take that time out to come down to the station and sit with me for, and with all the prep and having to wait and off camera, probably took an hour of his time, in addition to having to find the place to do that for me. So, yeah, fond thoughts of and memories of Archie Griffin. And yes, Randy Gradishar, watching him more as a Denver Bronco great later, of course, at the NFL level. Yeah, with that Orange Crush defense. And it's hard to do in a rivalry as hated and heated as this one has been for decades. But Archie Griffin is one of the men that you'll not hear anybody on either side of this rivalry say one bad word about. And given how great of a player he was, that means he's an even greater man. So that's quite an accomplishment. If you can come out of the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry with your credibility and integrity intact with both sides of that, then you are clearly walking a narrow road, brother. You're living right. So, all right, let's talk some ball. I gave out 4 names that I think are key to emerge in terms of becoming key depth pieces for the Wolverines this fall, because I'm really not worried about our starters, Mark. I'm really not. I still think our starting 22 is going to be one of the best in college football. I went and looked at it today, and everybody's talking about the amount of guys we lost, and we did lose a lot. We still have 19 players from the 2 deep in the national championship game that are back on this year's team. By contrast, Washington only has 3, okay? So we have 19 players back from the 2 deep in the national championship game. Washington only has 3. I think it's possible we have 3 to 5 first-round draft picks on our team for this year. It's the depth I'm concerned about. I mean, I think depth's going to matter more now with the expanded playoff and you're playing an NFL kind of season now in terms of length. But now we're also going to play Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State, 3 of the top 5 teams in the country. So I think depth's going to matter a lot. And I was really concerned about where our 2s and 3s were going into the spring. I was pleasantly surprised where that was at. But these are the kinds of guys that didn't start on last year's team, but would have played a lot of signature minutes, like Evan Link on the offensive line, like a Trente Jones. Cole Sullivan at linebacker, playing where Ernest Hausman was playing a year ago. Jair Hill playing more minutes at corner, especially because the guy we were grooming to replace Josh Wallace, DJ Waller, transferred. And Jordan Marshall, the Ohio Mr. Football, the first Mr. Football out of Ohio we've gotten since Charles Woodson.
who's that third back to go with Khalil and to go with Donovan. So I think these are key guys in fall camp that we need to emerge, because really the only starting spot on the team I am concerned about at all is at quarterback. Now, that's one you don't typically want to be concerned about, but I'm really not concerned about the rest of them. I'm concerned more about the depth. But what are you looking for, as you're scouting Michigan here during camp? What are you looking for hearing that you want or don't want to hear?
So, Steve, you've given me a lot to think about, and I will say that there are very strong narratives about this football team, both positive and negative, concerning what they are missing from 2023 and where these foundational strengths from this culture have been built. And I'm going to flip some of those narratives on their head and go strengths that could become a little bit more vulnerable, possibly than expected, and some weaknesses that could possibly be strengths or perceived weaknesses. So I'm going to start with the ongoing investigation and the scandal, not dealing with that, but as it pertains to this football team. Now, we saw a football team, and wherever you stand on the scandal and the investigation, anyone has to admire this football team and how it responded to that dark cloud hanging over them. That was admirable in regards to their determination, it bringing them together, them fighting through that, the criticism, everything that went through that. But that was 2023. Now, that culture seems to be the same, but is it? I think that's a delicate dynamic. You do have a new head coach. You do have some new coaching staff, although, again, they were very cautious to bring in and continue that culture in terms of their hires and their elevations within the staff. So I think they did everything to protect that possible, but every team's different and it's a new dynamic. So how is this team going to handle that adversity that's just kind of hanging over them as opposed to what we saw in 2023? Okay, on the field, Alex Orji.
Can I respond to that individually for just a second? I think that you bring up an excellent point there that I think a lot of people have not considered. The one benefit that I think to this is if you're Sharon Moore and you're looking to construct a narrative, okay, it's hard to be the defending champions, and we've people that do what you and I do for a living kind of laugh at Kirby Smart talking about we're disrespected and Oregon's got more money to spend on recruits than us. Come on, man. Okay. Or Nick Saban talking about rat poison. Dude, you got 14 first-round picks. Come on. All right, you know what I'm saying? And so you and I both know is the things that these teams will do in all sports to contrive a chip on the shoulder, are sometimes it's just laughable. But the one mitigating circumstance to your concern about that is also being picked fourth in the Big Ten. When was the last time a defending national champion was picked fourth in their own conference the next year, Mark? Your memory of the minutia of this sport rivals, if not exceeds my own. I can't think of that ever occurring, ever. Maybe, like, the only thing I could even possibly think of is when LSU lost all those guys. Were they still picked fourth? I don't know. Was that what you were going to say?
2020, I would go with that LSU team in 2020. Of course, we'd have to go back and look for sure. And then also the post Cam Newton team. They went 8-5. I don't think a lot was expected of them.
Fair.
In 2011.
In the history of the Big Ten, we don't have a lot of national champs. Has the reigning national champ been picked fourth in the Big Ten the next year? I think that's pretty rare. So I don't think
they've done that to Ohio State. No.
No. So I think that kind of helps you if you're Sharon. If you package those things together, okay? Because you're right. I think people don't understand. You can reach a saturation point with this as players, and we're doing this again, okay? But if you're worried about that, if you're Sharon, you can just package this all together. Dude, you got picked fourth in your own league. A team that's never won a Big Ten game, Oregon, is picked to be better than you. They've not even won a Big Ten game yet. They're picked to finish ahead of you, Penn State, we didn't even try. We didn't have to throw the ball against them. We just ran the ball down their throat for 30 minutes and embarrassed them in their own stadium. And they got booed off the field. They got booed off the field because of what we did physically to them. They're picked ahead of you right now in the Big Ten. So if you're Sharon, you can package that together into a credible narrative of, I guess we're just going to go out there and have to prove that. Don't be careful who you make the villain one more time. I think that helps, I think diminish some of your concern there, but I do think it's a valid point.
So we're going to start with the quarterback position, and I've got to give a level of trust to this coaching staff and Sharon Moore in particular, meaning that we don't know about Alex Orji. Nobody's proven anything here in terms of what he can deliver on Saturdays. However, I go back to what Nick Saban did when his MO each year, regardless of how highly touted these quarterbacks were, if there was not an incumbent, there was a quarterback battle year after year after year. Jay Coker would have to beat out Blake Sims, and then Jalen Hurts would have to win the job. And there was always a quarterback battle until it got to Bryce Young. Bryce Young was named the starter before spring practice. And I remember saying, Bryce Young must be the best quarterback in the country. I'm going to pick him to win the Heisman Trophy. And people were like, through 5 passes, Mark, you're an idiot in your quarterback rankings. You ranked him number 1. Well, Nick Saban's word is good enough for me. If he did this before they even went to spring practice, I'm taking his word for it. So I'm going to trust this staff, not to the extent of Nick Saban, but if they didn't go out and get a transfer quarterback, and it looks like Alex Orji is going to win this job, from what I understand, he is starting to separate himself. I think he's going to be a top, in a quarterback-deprived league, a top 4 or 5 quarterback in this league. And so I think that's something that when you think about what this team could be and in all the other positions on offense and defense, that is good news for Michigan fans if he's a top 4 to 5 quarterback in the Big Ten.
Listen, if he's a top 4 to 5 quarterback in the Big Ten, we're going to be in the Big Ten championship game again. I hope you're right. My concern on this front is twofold. One, even in crunch or in garbage time last year, they didn't let that young man throw a pass. Okay, that I mean, like downfield, not like a lateral, like downfield. Number 2, even as a spot, duty backup, Jack Tuttle has struggled to stay healthy. Got hurt last year again. He was hurt all of spring. There's some talk now that he's a little banged up early in camp. That is just my concern. But I hope you're right.
Okay, Donovan Edwards, he's the enigma. Now, how is he going to respond to being the guy and having to carry the workload? He's either going to thrive because he doesn't have to play in the shadow of Blake Corum, or he's going to wilt, and I don't expect him to become a non-factor. Of course, he's just much too talented. And I go back to, of course, the stretch drive of 2022 when he did become the man, and he fulfilled that role. So just something to consider there, a Donovan Edwards that has to be the man and has to take on the workload. And I know that they're more fortified, I think, at running back, Khalil Mullings and others behind him, Benjamin Hall, than they have been in the past. So
I think Donovan's going to have a massive year.
I know you.
I do. I think it's going to be similar to what Corum did 2 years ago in terms of production. It'll just be different. Like, I don't think he's going to be the guy that's carrying the ball 25, 30 times a game. I think it's going to be very Alvin Kamara-esque, Jahmyr Gibbs-esque. All right, 15 to 16 carries a game, 7 to 8 touches on jet sweeps and, in the passing game. So he's still going to get his 25 touches. But I think Donovan Edwards is going to have a monster year.
So, Steve, I'm going to go to a place that is an assumed strength, should be a strength, but maybe not to the extent that it has been during this 3-year run. And that would be both the offensive line and the defensive line. In losing 5 starters gone, Josh Preby comes in from Northwestern, very accomplished, solid player there. I understand there's a battle at right tackle, but when you lose all 5 starters from an offensive line that was arguably the best in the country once they took care of the issue with Carson Barnhart against Penn State at right guard, that's a difficult standard to keep. And then on the defensive side, Braden McCrager, Jalen Harrell, Chris Jenkins gone. I understand this is still supposed to be just a massive front that is going to dominate, but dominate to the extent that they have the last few years. That, again, a difficult standard. So I'm not saying that the offensive and defensive lines are not going to be good, but are they going to be dominant to the extent that they have been?
The defensive front, the starting 4 on the defensive line, it is possible it's the best I've seen at Michigan, or like since 97, when all 4 of those guys had meaningful NFL careers. Rob Renas, Josh Williams, you had James Hall. That front 4 Michigan's never had dual tackles like this. I mean, this is the stuff of what Georgia and Alabama have with the guys that they have. You're right that the depth is not what it was the last couple of years. Okay, and again, that will be an issue when you're playing 3 of the top 5 teams in the preseason, and you're going to play more games to get to where you want to go. So that is an issue. I think Rayshon Benny, it's their third defensive tackle, would start for about 85% of the teams in college football. But who's the fourth guy? And we're going to find that out here during fall camp. There's a few names I could think of, but I don't know the answer to that. On the offensive line, this is why I really want you to. I want the. It's funny. I don't know if you guys see this on the Ohio State side, but on the Michigan side, I know you guys have like 5 major websites. We have 2, basically. All right, the 24/7 one and the On3 one. There's others, but those 2 basically dwarf like everybody else. And today they have entirely different quarterback updates. All right, the On3 site says that Davis Warren's looked the best so in the first week of camp, and the 24/7 site says that Alex Orji has. Okay, but I'm hoping it is Orji, and the reason being is the running threat element that he has already proven that he possesses will aid some of the issues with the offensive line that you're talking about, meaning the margin for error there. Like we've still got a lot of guys that have started a lot of games. I mean, Giovanni El-Hadi started numerous games in college football. Miles Hinton has, Josh Preeb has, but they've not all started games together. And when that quarterback is a running threat, and that means you've got numbers in the box, that really increases your MOE on the offensive line. And so, I mean, hey, if Orji's not the best quarterback in camp, you can't make him the starter for obvious reasons, but I'm really hoping that he is, because I think that helps to mitigate against some of the justified offensive line concerns that you mentioned. And I also think, again, this is another issue where I'm more concerned about the depth than the starters. You know, our second 5 offensive line last year, I think would have been a top 5 offensive line in the Big Ten. And a lot of those guys are going to start now. Okay, well then who are your 6th, 7th, or 8th offensive linemen this year? Because you're going to have injuries, right? And that goes back to one of the reasons why I highlighted Evan Link here at the top of the show.
Steve, my last position's secondary. And Josh Wallace gone, Keon Sabb gone, Rod Moore, unfortunately, can't play this year. And then Michigan fans, believe me, I actually admire Michigan players, and this became one of my favorite players in college football for what he was able to do in a position change and how amazing he became in that position, and that's Mike Sanders-Still, who became, a second-round draft choice after converting from wide receiver. I just think, I identified it, and I didn't have to be a genius to do so because others did as well, that early in the season, these 2 guys as a corner tandem, Johnson and Sanders-Still, they are the best. They are the best. And I just think Mike Sanders-Still is going to be missed a ton. Steve, you probably, I'm sure, know these numbers. This defense gave up 55% completion percentage, but more impressively than that, 8 touchdowns and 18 interceptions. In this world of throw it around and quarterbacks with 4-to-1 and 5-to-1 TD to pick ratios that aren't even that excellent quarterbacks, that's just, I don't know. Again, I know that they're going to be good there, but to keep up that standard, 8 to 18 is pretty crazy.
It is. There's no way they'll keep that up. I mean, our numbers over there are good. Quentin Johnson played a lot of key minutes down the stretch as a third safety. He's back. Keon Sabb will be missed, but him and Zeke Berry were kind of a package deal as recruits a few years ago. They're basically the same player, and so I think you'll see Zeke step in there and play that position now, and he was really good in the spring. You're right about what Sanders-Still and Rod Moore are both very good players. Okay, but these were also 3-star prospects. I mean, Rod Moore got passed up by Ohio State. Now you and I come from an era where Michigan won a lot of football games taking players from Ohio that Ohio State passed up on. Okay, but Michigan can replace Rod Moore and Mike Sanders-Still athletically, especially when you look at the guys they brought in. I mean, Jared Mangum was an honorable mention All Big Ten last year on a terrible Michigan State defense, which means that's hard to do. I love the Wesley Walker pickup from Tennessee. I think that's a name that a lot of people are not talking a lot about. I think that he's going to play significant minutes. But who's the signal caller back there? You go back and watch our games last year, you can see Rod Moore and Mike Sanders-Still just literally calling out route trees pre-snap, okay? And Makari Page has played a ton of safety here at Michigan, going back to his freshman year in 2020, but he's not necessarily known as the most vocal guy. And so that's the concern that I have is athletically, I think we have players that can at least come close to what those guys can do on the field. But it's what those guys brought mentally. I mean, from the time he stepped on campus, Jimmy talked about no one spends more time on the iPad because they log all the minutes, and there's nobody on their iPad more looking at opposing game plans than, Rod Moore. Mike Sainristil just literally out there calling out route trees pre-snap and telling guys where their cover is going to go. I don't know that we have those replacements there, and so that is a concern that I have where those two guys come into play.
That's what I have in terms of position rundown, Steve. I just want to say that in light of what you had to say about Archie Griffin, that I just got done stating this a couple hours ago on my show in response to Jim Harbaugh's statement with the Los Angeles Chargers about the allegations coming out and his attachment to it. When he says, I did not lie, I did not cheat, these are values that I have carried on through and teach to my family. His 40-year public record shows me, for as much as I've rooted against Jim Harbaugh on the field, I have always admired him as a man and what he has stood for, his beliefs, his values, and I think his statement today is consistent with his life.
Well, I'm so done talking about it. I have not addressed it at all, either way, his statement or the report or anything of that nature. But since you brought it up, I'll say this. Nothing. The Big Ten presented no evidence last year that he was involved in this. There's nothing in that draft that indicates that he was involved in this. If you want to say he should have known, he was the head coach, happened on his watch, you're welcome to have that opinion. You might even be right. But no one has produced one singular piece of evidence directly linking Jim Harbaugh to any of this thus far. And given the fact the guy has already been suspended for it, I kind of think that's something worthy of noting, But moving on, I'd be remiss if I didn't pick your brain on the other side. There are Michigan. Most people listening and watching are Michigan fans, so give us some intel from the enemy camp. What are you hearing out of Buckeye land so far?
I try to cut it straight, Steve. As you well know, I do my best to stay as impartial as possible, even though I admit that is impossible. And I have tried to, in recent days, after staying away from this topic for months and months, as best I could, except for being asked in call-in shows, I have addressed it. And I even went through a list of, this is the pro-Michigan case. Here are all the items that I can point to say they are innocent, or at least they were just a rogue situation in which Connor Stallions was acting alone, versus these are the damaging evidence pieces, none of which are a smoking gun. But there are some things that I have question marks to. And
I think there's a very simple explanation of this, Mark.
Yeah.
Is that Michigan was stealing signs like almost every program in college football was. And one young man with a military background decided that he had come up with a loophole and that he was going to be able to exploit this even beyond what other people have. And most college football programs operate on some form of don't ask, don't tell. I would imagine, for example, at Ohio State, Ryan Day has no idea what every phone call with every booster that every player has ever had, and neither did Jim Tressel, and neither did Woody Hayes. I mean, that's just the reality of the sport in which we're a part of, with these rules that largely go unenforced, and yet everybody's supposed to live by at the exact same time. But I think the simplest explanation of this is Michigan was actively involved in sign stealing, like almost every program in the country is to some extent. And this guy's got a military background and thought, I've got a loophole here with an undefined rule. Okay, and to what extent does it go, and does it matter? Does in-person mean transmissions? Does it mean non-military, football personnel? Does it mean my buddies? What does it mean? I think that's a very simple explanation that would explain exactly what was going on and why, despite everything that's gone on about this, look at all the leaks. You ever seen the NCAA leak drafts? You ever seen the NCAA leak in any case ever the way it has in this Michigan case going back to last fall? Never happened, not once. So I think, given those leaks, if they had Jim Harbaugh dead to rights, like texting with Connor Stallions, hey, give me that sub-package signal from Ohio State on 3rd and long, Connor. Don't you think Pete Thamel probably would have written that story by now, Mark? Don't you think, probably, if they had that? Because I kind of think that was probably the first story they would have written, that old Pete would have written for y'all, I think, if they had that. So I think that the simplest explanation here is pretty obvious. Michigan was trying to steal signals like everybody else steals everybody else's signals, and this young man realized that there was a loophole, at least he thought he realized there was one, and tried to exploit it. Tell me what other explanation would connect every other particular dot here.
I'm just trying to kind of size this up on game day in regards to how this plays out, that he is their ace He's their ace in terms of sign stealing, and he's able to do this possibly from play one, from the first series. I would think that they would take a little bit of time throughout the game to be able to then start to steal the signs. And he obviously was credited with doing this well because he kept his job through the 21 season, 22 season into 23. He would still have his job and be operating in such a way if this investigation wouldn't have started. So he was obviously considered to be a good employee. Mm-hmm. So it was working, what he was doing.
Agreed. I don't disagree. I also think you're not going to ask somebody necessarily, hey, give me all the details on what you are doing. That's just, if for people that have never covered a college athletics team, the amount of questions that go unasked in these programs everywhere is high, okay? Because everybody's looking for an edge all of the time, all right? All of the time. If they had something that linked Jim Harbaugh, look at the thing they're saying about Sharon Moore. I deleted text. Okay, well, you've got the text now. Show me the ones where he was working with Connor Stallions on this. Oh, you don't have them. That's why you're doing level 2 violation instead of level 1. Because if you had all this stuff, Pete Thamel would have written this article already. Okay, so that's the reality. If they had smoking guns with all of this, you would have known it. So I know there are people in your fan base that have masturbated quite often in the last 8 months to this idea of vacated wins and asterisks. And I'm afraid to tell you, like Onan, you spilled your seed on the ground and you will get no recompense for it. That's just not going to occur. This story will exist forever in some gray area, whether Michigan openly cheated, took something that was an unwritten rule and went too far, whether Connor Stallions is a folk hero, blah, 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 blah. But this, the reality is if they had smoking guns, you would have seen them. Pete Thamel would have written that article by now.
Okay. I have tried to do my best to stay, again, neutral and
but we still want to know what's going on in Ohio State's camp, damn it. So tell us that. What's going on over there?
At Ohio State?
Yes. We want to know what's going on in the enemy camp. That's what I asked. That's what I really asked you about. What's going on over there?
I need to
spill the tea.
Will Howard. Well, this isn't going to tell you much, but what I personally need to know is that Will Howard is not the next version of JT Barrett. And I admire JT Barrett for all that he did at Ohio State, but I think we would all agree that he is not leading this team to a national championship.
I know Michigan fans are like, JT Barrett kicked our ass for 4 years. We agree. We also hope he's not the next version of JT Barrett. We agree with you on that, Mark. And we're in solidarity with you on that one. Yeah.
Well, a few weeks after one of those butt kickings, or actually it was the butt kicking by a quarter inch, JT Barrett got shut out by Clemson. So again, I love JT Barrett in principle, but I don't want to see him back on the field in the form of Will Howard. And I'm just hoping that that's not the case. That's the biggest issue. But much like what you said with the Michigan offensive line protecting Alex Orji and not needing to be as dominant, hopefully that mitigates the Ohio State issues up front as they try to work things out and figure out the center and guard positions in particular, because they're going to be protecting a quarterback who can escape as opposed to last season.
All right, we're running long here, but I've got to throw one concern at you since you threw your concerns at us. One concern that I would have to you guys, wide receivers are mercurial personalities typically, okay, at high levels of football. You're out there all by yourself, okay? You're when the ball is thrown to you, everybody's on you. You're not in a scrum like a running back. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they're used to there's a certain amount of limelight that goes with that. And I don't know, man. I'm sure he got paid well, but Quinshon Judkins could have gotten paid well at Ole Miss too and gotten himself 25 carries a game. You're right. You're not bringing him in. You're not bringing Trevion Henderson back, and you're not bringing Chip Kelly in because we're throwing 50 times around the yard. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to be really fascinated between the amount of teams. You guys' schedule looks very much like ours, where there's now it's more spread out. Ours was all at the end. Yours is more spread out than ours, but it's very similar in that it's really a 3-game season, and the rest of the games are glorified warm-ups. Well, you're not going to be out there throwing to Emeka Egbuka 42-3, okay? Against Illinois, all right? And so I'm very fascinated with Jeremiah Smith, the freshman, Egbuka, Carnell Tate. Everybody's forgetting about him. He was a 5-star just 1 year ago. These guys came to Ohio State thinking that they're going to be frisbee catching dogs and playing street ball with Ryan Day. Well, now you go out and you get a game manager plus quarterback, and you bring in 2 stud tailbacks and an offensive coordinator who loves JT Barrett style quarterbacks. That's what he likes. Jeremiah Masoli kind of quarterbacks. Okay. And if between that system and the amount of games you're going to be blowing people out, I will be fascinated to see how your wide receiver core handles that. When they are not getting the typical amount of totes that an Ohio State wide receiver core gets, because I don't think that they will, between how dominant you're going to be on much of this schedule and the way that Chip Kelly likes to play.
I can't refute that, except to say that's why you pay coaches a ton of money, and that's why you build culture, and that's why you do it.
Right on. Good to see you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
You bet. This week's X-Poll results, we asked you about the same 4 players we started off talking about here this week on the show. Which inexperienced Wolverine will become a key contributor for Michigan football this fall? And Jair Hill kind of running away with this. And normally I tend to be contrarian when one answer in a multiple choice question runs away with it. But I agree it's him. I think he's the most likely to start August the 31st, opposite of Will Johnson. So I agree that it's him. But again, I think all the other 3 names, Evan Link on the offensive line, Jordan Marshall at at running back, and Cole Sullivan at linebacker are also key players that if we're having a very good season, those are guys that are playing some meaningful minutes here and snaps this year, getting them set up as well to be cornerstone players moving forward. That brings us to our feedback of the week. And this is in response to the report that Sam Webb over at the Michigan Insider on the 24/7 Sports Network, he put out talking about Alex Orji has really excelled the first week of camp, which was totally contradicted by a report Chris Ballas at the Wolverine put out today saying his sources are telling him Davis Warren has been the best quarterback so far. But I would love for the Sam Webb report to be true because Orji is the highest ceiling quarterback on the roster. I mean, when you look at he's on the freaks list right now over at The Athletic. From Bruce Mandel. If he can be a more accurate passer, what he provides in the running game is next level stuff and can really open up the running game as a whole. But if your quarterback's not a threat to throw the ball downfield, that is a limiting factor. So him stepping forward, here's hoping. I'm not choosing sides between Sam and Chris. No sides there to choose on the personal level, but on a fan level, I'm hoping Sam's right because I think it would benefit the program greatly for Orji to be the quarterback that steps forward. He's the highest ceiling player we have in the room at the position. And if you go to our feedback of the week, you can put it back up there, Aaron, for just a second if you don't mind. If you go to our feedback of the week, Michigander agrees. He says, it sounds to me like we have a legit quarterback competition between Jack and Alex. Let's hope that's the case. And it's a legit quarterback competition. You know, I don't know if you guys remember, but it wasn't too long ago we had a phrase around these parts, Lions good. Now, we don't use these kinds of terms anymore because Dan Campbell has set fire to the House of Usher. That curse has been lifted, okay? But we used to have this saying, you know, Lions good. It kind of reflected the fact that maybe that player's not that good, but he's better. He's the best that the Lions have. So he's not that he's good, but he's Lions good, okay? Like Louis Delmas, remember him? Wasn't that good. But he was the best safety we had, so he was Lions good, okay? We need Jack Tuttle and Alex Orji to not be Michigan good, Wolverine good. Like they're the best we have. We need them to be good. And I know we don't have a quarterback-driven system. I get all of that. But if you don't have a quarterback that is some threat to throw the football, you cannot hide your quarterback in college football. You cannot. So if you don't have a quarterback that is some threat to make a meaningful completion down the field, sooner or later, defenses get wind of that and stack the box against you. So there's 2 kinds of competitions here. There's the one where, well, we don't have anybody yet, so we're just going to let this thing play out. And then there's the other where these are 2 guys who could both be good and they're making each other better. Let's hope it's the latter. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review, share. Whether you are watching right here on YouTube or listening on iTunes or elsewhere, we would love it if you did those things because they prod the algorithms to help us find more Michigan fans just like you. So thank you to all of you for doing that. Also, don't forget to follow us on X in between episodes at Michigan Podcast as well. That'll do it for this week's episode. Until the next time, we'll see you here in a couple of weeks right here on Michigan Podcast.